3 weeks ago, my parents stood up at their 40th anniversary dinner, announced they were taking the whole family to Hawaii, waited for everyone to clap, and then, when I asked what time our flight was, my father looked right at me and said, I wasn't going. Someone had to stay behind and watch my sister's kids. That was the moment I finally understood something I should have understood years earlier. In my family, I was never the daughter they included. I was the help they didn't have to pay. My name is Wendy Dixon. I'm 32, and if you'd asked anyone in my family what kind of person I was before that night, they would have said I was reliable, helpful, easygoing, flexible. That word came up a lot. Flexible. It sounds nice until you realize it really means your time is considered worthless and your life is treated like empty space other people can fill. My parents live in a white colonial house outside Boston, the kind with the trimmed lawn and the clean shutters and the 2-car garage that always looks ready for a realtor's photo shoot. My father, Harold, retired from a regional bank a few years ago and still carries himself like people should listen when he clears his throat. My mother, Patricia, has never had a paid job, but she acts like she runs a small country. Church committees, charity drives, table settings, family image. Everything in her life is about presentation. Then there's my younger sister, Megan, who has somehow spent most of her adult life being treated like the star of a show the rest of us were supposed to support. She's married to Derek Hartley, a corporate attorney who says the name of his firm like it's a title. They have 2 kids, Oliver and Sophie, a nice house, a Lexus SUV, and the kind of family status my mother loves showing off. Me, I drive a 10-year-old Honda Civic. I do part-time accounting work from home, and when people asked what I did, my mother usually answered for me. Wendy helps out. That was the label. Not daughter, not professional, not even Wendy, really. Just someone useful. Once you've been the useful one long enough, you stop reacting to the small humiliations because they come so often they start to feel normal. My car went on the street because Derek's Lexus looked better in the driveway. At holidays, I got there first and left last. Thanksgiving meant I was up at 6 a.m, starting the turkey, ironing table linens, arranging flowers, washing china I wasn't allowed to use unless I was serving everyone else with it. Megan would show up around noon in a nice sweater, kiss the air beside my mother's face, and sit down with a glass of wine while I was still trying to figure out oven space. Christmas was the same, except I also wrapped the presents because my mother's arthritis somehow flared up only around tape, scissors, and anything mildly inconvenient. Birthday parties for my niece and nephew were worse. I was the one filling goodie bags, wiping frosting off chairs, keeping toddlers from knocking over centerpieces, and doing all the cleanup while Megan disappeared for just 20 minutes. That somehow turned into an hour and a half because she'd gone to get her nails done. If I ever hesitated, even once, my mother got that cold tone in her voice and said, "Family comes first." I believed that for a long time. Or maybe I just wanted to believe that if I kept showing up, eventually somebody would notice I was carrying more than my share. The truth is, even before that anniversary dinner, I'd already started waking up a little. It happened slowly. I'd be standing at the sink after another family meal, scraping baked-on cheese out of one of my mother's expensive casserole dishes, and I'd think, when was the last time anybody invited me anywhere unless they needed something from me? I couldn't answer that. A few years earlier, my boyfriend Kevin ended a 4-year relationship with words that stuck to me like burrs. He said, "I love you, Wendy, but you're always just there." That wrecked me more than I like to admit. A few days later, I walked into a pawn shop downtown and saw a used Canon camera sitting in the glass case. I bought it with money I should have saved, took it home, and didn't tell anybody. That camera became my one private thing. I started taking pictures of women people barely seemed to register. Women waiting alone at bus stops, women mopping office floors after hours, women carrying groceries in the rain, women sitting quietly in spaces where no one looked twice at them. I knew those faces. I understood that feeling. I created an anonymous Instagram account and called the series Invisible Women. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Megan. I didn't tell anyone except my Aunt Ruth, my mother's younger sister, the relative my family talked about like she'd ruined her life just because she left Boston years ago and opened a cafe with a pottery studio in Carmel by the Sea. Ruth was the only person in my family who ever looked at something I made and didn't treat it like a cute little side hobby. When I sent her one of my photos, she called me and said, "Wendy, this is real. You have an eye." I actually cried after I hung up because nobody in my family had ever said anything like that to me. A few weeks before my parents' anniversary dinner, something happened that I almost didn't let myself believe. I got an email from a gallery in Monterey asking if I'd be interested in talking about my work. I honestly thought it was spam at first. I stared at it for so long my coffee went cold. Good things didn't usually happen to me, not in the part of my life that actually mattered. I was still sitting on that email, still not sure whether I was allowed to take myself seriously, when my mother called and told me I needed to block off most of the week to help with the anniversary dinner. 30 guests, catered food, but a few things would still need handling. Flowers to organize, place cards to write, crystal to polish, details to manage. I said yes before I even thought about it. That was my reflex then. Say yes, figure yourself out later. I had no idea that by the end of that dinner, I'd be standing in my parents' dining room in a black dress with a dirty dessert plate in my hand, listening to my father tell a room full of people that the family vacation did not include me. The week before the party, I basically moved into my parents' house during daylight hours. My mother called it helping with a few details, which was her way of making 3 full days of unpaid labor sound like holding a door open. I ordered white roses and peonies from the florist she liked, even though she changed her mind twice and blamed me both times. I hand-wrote 60 place cards because printed ones looked impersonal. I ironed tablecloths, polished Waterford glasses, confirmed the caterer, checked the dessert order, and cleaned the downstairs bathroom because my mother said guests notice baseboards. She said that while standing in the doorway with a cup of tea, watching me on my knees with a sponge. I remember thinking that if a stranger walked in, they would have assumed I was hired for the event. Then I remember realizing that would not have bothered my mother at all. On the day of the anniversary dinner, I got there at 7 a.m. in jeans and an old t-shirt because I knew better than to wear anything nice before the work was done. By noon, my feet hurt. By 4 p.m., I had eaten half a granola bar over the sink. By 6 p.m., the house looked exactly the way my mother wanted it to look. Candles on the mantle, flowers on the sideboard, rented chairs tucked around the extended dining table. My mother's china laid out like a museum exhibit. I went upstairs, washed my face in the guest bathroom, and changed into a plain black dress I'd brought in a garment bag. When I came down, my mother looked me over like I was another table arrangement that had come in slightly wrong. "Is that what you're wearing?" she asked. I said it was simple and appropriate. She gave this little sigh and said, "Fine, just don't hover. Tonight is about your father and me." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because I had spent the entire day making sure the night could be about them. Guests started arriving at 7 p.m., and I slipped into the role I knew too well. I passed appetizers, refilled wine, pointed people toward the bathroom, carried coats upstairs, and smiled at people who didn't know who I was. One woman actually asked me if I was with the catering staff. Before I could answer, my mother stepped in and said, "Oh, that's Wendy, our other daughter. She's helping out tonight." Our other daughter. helping out. She said it lightly, like it was nothing, but I felt it land in my stomach. A few minutes later, Megan arrived in a red wrap dress, with Derek behind her and the kids dressed like they were going to be photographed for a catalog. My mother practically floated across the room to greet them. She praised Megan's dress, Derek's promotion from the year before, Oliver's little blazer, Sophie's curls. Then she turned to the guests and introduced Megan like she was announcing an award winner. "This is our daughter Megan and her husband Derek. Derek's a partner at Whitmore and Associates." People clapped and congratulated him. Nobody mentioned that I had done Derek's tax returns for 3 years for free because Megan said accountants were so expensive. At one point, Derek found me near the kitchen with a tray of crab cakes in my hand and Sophie squirming against his side. "Can you take them for a while?" he asked, already shifting her toward me before I answered. Oliver was pulling at his jacket and Derek looked annoyed, like the children had interrupted a business meeting instead of a family party. I took Sophie because I always took Sophie. I took Oliver too. I fed them in the kitchen while the adults ate in the dining room. I wiped juice off Sophie's dress, listened to Oliver explain dinosaurs for 20 minutes, and kept them quiet because Megan wanted to mingle and my mother hated when the kids got too loud in front of guests. When I finally came back into the dining room, dessert was already being passed around. There was no plate save for me. Nobody had done it on purpose, I don't think. That almost made it worse. Forgetting me was so normal, it didn't require effort. The announcement came around 9 p.m., after my mother's tiramisu and before coffee. My father stood up and tapped his champagne glass with a fork. The room quieted right away because Harold Dixon liked an audience and knew how to use one. He thanked everyone for coming, talked about 40 years of marriage, 4 decades of building a family, a home, a reputation. My mother sat beside him, smiling like she was in a magazine profile. Megan reached for Derek's hand. I was standing just inside the kitchen doorway, holding a dessert plate with a smear of cream still on it. Then my father said they had one more surprise. "Next week," he announced, "Patricia and I are taking the whole family to Hawaii. 1 week at the Four Seasons in Maui. Just us, the Dixons, celebrating properly." The room warmed instantly. People gasped and clapped. Megan squealed, actually squealed, and hugged my mother. I felt myself smile before I could stop it. The whole family. I pictured warm air, ocean water, maybe one morning where I didn't wake up already responsible for someone else's needs. I stepped forward and asked, "That sounds amazing. What time is our flight?" It was a normal question. That's what still gets me. I didn't ask who paid. I didn't ask where I was sleeping. I didn't even ask for details. I just asked what time our flight was. My father's face changed. Not dramatically, not like in a movie. His expression just tightened, and he looked at my mother for half a second too long. My mother's smile froze. The room did this strange little shift where everyone could feel something was wrong before anyone said it. Then my father said, "You don't need to know, Wendy." I thought I'd misunderstood him. I said, "What do you mean?" He cleared his throat and said, louder this time, "You're not part of this trip. Someone has to stay behind and take care of the kids." I can still see the plate in my hand. I can still feel the weight of it. 30 guests stared at me while my father explained that the whole family meant everyone except the daughter holding dirty dishes. My mother jumped in like she was smoothing over a seating problem. "Megan and Derek need a real vacation," she said. "They work so hard, and the children are comfortable with you." Derek didn't even look embarrassed. He just nodded, like this had already been settled in a meeting I hadn't been invited to. Megan gave me this soft, pleading look that made her seem fragile and me seem unreasonable before I had even spoken. I said, "Nobody asked me." My mother's eyes sharpened. Wendy, don't start. You don't have anything important scheduled, and family comes first. That was the line. Not because it was new, but because she said it in front of everyone, while excluding me from the family part and demanding the sacrifice part. Someone near the table whispered, "Poor thing. She must be used to it." I don't know who said it. I didn't turn to look. I set the dessert plate down very carefully because my hand had started shaking, and I said, "Of course, I understand." I hate that I said that. I hate that even then, my first instinct was to make the room comfortable again. I went into the kitchen and stood at the sink with both hands on the counter, trying to breathe quietly enough that no one would hear. Behind me, the party slowly restarted. That might have been the worst part, honestly. The laughter came back, forks clicked against plates. My father resumed being charming. Megan came in about 10 minutes later, smelling like perfume and wine, and told me not to be upset. "You know how it is," she said. "Derek and I really need this. The kids love you, and honestly, they'll barely notice we're gone." I kept washing glasses because if I looked at her, I thought something ugly might come out of my mouth. Then she pulled out her phone and said Derek had already made a list for me. Bedtimes, food notes, allergy reminders, Sophie's eardrops if needed, Oliver's routine. She was texting it to me while I stood there in my mother's kitchen after being publicly humiliated. She didn't ask. She didn't pause. She just transferred responsibility like she was forwarding a receipt. That was when the thought came in clean and cold, and for once I didn't push it away. They don't see me as family. They see me as staff. And staff can quit. I stayed until almost midnight because, of course, nobody else was going to clean up. My mother had gone upstairs with a headache after accepting compliments all night. My father had disappeared into his den. Megan and Derek left early because the kids were tired, even though I had been the one keeping them fed and calm for half the evening. I folded rented tablecloths, stacked chairs by the wall, wrapped leftover dessert, and loaded the dishwasher until the kitchen looked close enough to perfect that my mother wouldn't call me in the morning to complain. I should have gone home. I should have grabbed my coat and let the rest sit there. But the old training was still in me, and I hated leaving things unfinished, even when the people benefiting from it had just made me feel like a servant in front of 30 guests. Around 12:15 a.m., I remembered a client file I needed to send before morning. My laptop was at my apartment, and I was too tired to drive home, send it, and come back if my mother noticed anything missing. Her laptop was sitting open on the kitchen counter beside a half-finished cup of tea. I told myself I would only use the browser for 2 minutes. I opened it, pulled up my email, sent the file, and almost closed the laptop. Then I saw my name. Not in my inbox. In my mother's Gmail, which was still open in another tab. The subject line said, "Hawaii arrangements and Wendy situation." I sat there staring at it with my finger frozen on the trackpad. I knew clicking it was wrong. I also knew in that moment that whatever was inside that thread would probably be the closest thing to honesty I had ever gotten from my family. The first email was from my mother to Megan a week before the party. It said, "We'll keep Wendy here with the children. She doesn't need to come. She has nothing important going on anyway." I read that once and felt my face get hot. Then I kept reading, because apparently I wanted to make sure it hurt properly. My mother had written, "Derek is right. It's like having free help, and honestly, she should be grateful we give her something useful to do." Megan's reply came a few minutes later. "Totally agree. She'll probably feel needed for once. It's kind of sad, but at least it works out for us." I don't know how long I sat there. The kitchen was dark except for the laptop screen and one small lamp over the stove. I could hear the house settling, the refrigerator humming, the soft tick of my mother's wall clock. I read "free help" over and over, until the words stopped feeling like words and became something heavier. I took screenshots with hands that didn't feel steady. I emailed them to myself, deleted the sent message from my mother's account, and cleared the history because some practical part of my brain was still functioning. Then I closed the laptop and just sat there. I didn't cry right away. That surprised me. I thought something like that would make me sob, but mostly I felt quiet, almost numb. It wasn't that I had discovered they didn't value me. I think I already knew that. What hurt was seeing that they had discussed it so casually, like I was a discount they were happy to use. My mother didn't misunderstand me. Megan didn't accidentally overlook me. They knew exactly what role they had put me in, and they were counting on me to stay too embarrassed, too loyal, or too trained to refuse. I drove home at 1 a.m. through streets that were almost empty. My apartment looked the same when I walked in, but it didn't feel the same. Beige carpet, secondhand couch, leaning bookshelf, one bedroom, one window with a view of the building next door. My mother had visited once and called it a little depressing, which was funny because it was the only place in my life where nobody asked me to move my car, wipe a counter, take a child, or disappear into the background. I sat on the floor beside my bed and pulled up the email from Marcus Coleman at Coastal Light Gallery. I had answered him once, carefully, politely, like someone afraid to sound too eager. He wanted to see my full portfolio in person. He said the work had a point of view. He used words I had been too scared to repeat out loud because they made the whole thing feel real. At 1:43 a.m., I called Aunt Ruth. I almost hung up after the first ring because who calls someone that late unless something terrible has happened? She answered on the second ring, wide awake or pretending to be. "Wendy?" she said. "What did they do?" That was all it took. I told her about the announcement, the dirty plate, Megan's list, the whisper from the guest, and then I read her the emails. When I got to free help, my voice cracked so hard I had to stop. Ruth didn't interrupt me. She let the silence sit there for a few seconds, then said, "You can come here." I told her I couldn't just leave. I had clients, rent, my family, obligations, all the words people use when they're trying to make a cage sound responsible. Ruth said, "You have a room above my cafe if you want it. You can work mornings with me, meet Marcus, and figure out the rest after you get here." I said my mother would lose her mind. Ruth said, "Your mother has been using that threat for years because it works." I barely slept. By 6 a.m., I was sitting on the edge of my bed with 3 open suitcases around me, feeling ridiculous and terrified and strangely awake. I packed clothes, documents, my laptop, chargers, the Canon camera, 2 lenses, and the old cashmere scarf I kept wrapped around the camera body. I left behind things I thought I cared about and realized I didn't. The apron Megan gave me that said, "World's Best Aunt," stayed folded in the bottom drawer. I looked at it for a second before closing the drawer because that apron suddenly felt like a uniform I had been wearing without noticing. Around noon, my mother called, probably to discuss the babysitting schedule. I watched the phone buzz until it stopped. Then Megan texted me the children's routines again, this time with bullet points and little red exclamation marks beside the important parts. I didn't answer her either. 2 days before their Hawaii flight, I drove back to my parents' house because I wanted to say it once, clearly, to their faces. My mother was in the living room, sorting resort outfits across the couch. Megan was scrolling through hotel photos. My father sat in his chair with the newspaper, pretending not to hear anything until he had to. I stood in the doorway and said, "I'm not watching the kids next week." Megan looked up first, annoyed before she even understood. My mother's hands froze on a stack of sundresses. I said, "I'm leaving for California tomorrow. I have a work opportunity there." For a second, nobody spoke, and that silence told me more than any argument could have. They weren't worried about me moving across the country. They were calculating what my absence was going to cost them. My mother was the first one to speak because she was usually the first one to recover when the room stopped obeying her. "What do you mean you're leaving for California?" she asked, like California was not a state but a personal insult. I told her it was for my photography. That made Megan blink. My father lowered the newspaper a little more. My mother gave a short laugh, not loud, just enough to tell everyone in the room how seriously they were supposed to take me. "Wendy, this is not the week for one of your little interests," she said. "Megan and Derek planned around you." I said, "No, they planned over me." It came out quieter than I expected, but it was the first honest thing I had said to them in a long time. Megan sat up straighter, already looking hurt in that polished way she used when she wanted the room to turn against someone. "I don't understand why you're doing this to me," she said. "I'm your sister." She said it like I had forgotten, when the whole problem was that I remembered too well. I remembered every school pickup I handled when she was overwhelmed, every birthday party I ran while she posed for photos, every tax form Derek sent me with a casual, "You're the best," and no payment attached. I said, "You didn't ask me if I could watch the kids. You all announced it in front of people, so I'd look awful if I said no." Derek had come down the stairs by then, phone still in hand, tie loosened like he'd been interrupted from something more important. He looked at me and said, "Come on, Wendy, it's 1 week. Don't blow up a family trip over babysitting." That was Derek's gift. He could make anything sound small as long as it was costing somebody else. My mother stood up then, slow and stiff, like she was about to deliver a sentence. "Family comes first," she said. "Your sister needs you. The children need you. Your father and I need this trip to go smoothly." I looked at her resort dresses spread across the couch, the neat little piles of linen and sandals and sun hats, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt tired. "Family came first when you needed place cards written," I said. "Family came first when you needed your house cleaned. Family came first when Megan needed free childcare. But when you said the whole family was going to Hawaii, suddenly I wasn't family anymore." My father finally folded the newspaper. He didn't look angry. He looked uncomfortable, which somehow bothered me more. He said, "Wendy, your mother didn't mean it that way." I turned to him and asked, "Then how did she mean it?" He had nothing, not one word. That was when my mother's face changed. The soft, public version of her vanished, and the colder, private version stepped forward. "If you walk out now," she said, "do not expect to come running back when this photography thing falls apart." Megan whispered, "Mom," but she didn't disagree. Derek looked relieved, like finally someone was putting me back in my place. I nodded because I had expected something like that, and still, hearing it hurt. Not enough to stop me, though. I said, "I understand." My mother's mouth tightened. She thought that meant she had scared me. It didn't. It meant I understood the deal now. I understood that belonging in that family was conditional on service, and I was done paying for a seat they never intended to give me. The next day was ugly in a quiet, exhausting way. My mother called 6 times and left voicemails that got worse as the day went on. First she sounded stern, then wounded, then theatrical. She said I was embarrassing the family. She said Megan had been crying. She said my father barely touched his dinner. She said Oliver kept asking where Aunt Wendy was going, which I knew was probably not true because Oliver was 5 and more interested in dinosaurs than family politics. Megan texted me long messages about how stressed she was, how Derek's job was intense, how I didn't understand what it was like to have kids, how sisters were supposed to show up for each other. The strangest part was how none of them asked about the opportunity. Not once. Nobody asked where I was going, what the gallery was called, whether I was scared, whether I needed help with the drive. Their panic had nothing to do with losing me. It had to do with losing the version of me that made their lives easier. I left Boston before sunrise with 3 suitcases, my camera bag, and a paper cup of gas station coffee that tasted terrible and still felt like freedom. My Honda Civic was packed so full I could barely see out the back window. I drove west with my phone on silent and the screenshots saved in 3 different places because I didn't trust myself not to delete them if guilt got too loud. The first few hours felt unreal. I kept expecting my mother's voice to come through the car speakers somehow, telling me I was being dramatic, telling me to turn around, telling me this was not who I was. Somewhere in Pennsylvania, I pulled into a rest area, sat in the parked car, and almost called her. My thumb actually hovered over her name. Then Megan texted, "Mom says if you're not back when we return from Hawaii, you're dead to her." I stared at that message until my stomach settled. I deleted it and kept driving. It took me 5 days to get to California because I didn't have the nerve or the energy to rush. I slept in cheap motels with humming air conditioners. I ate pancakes at diners where nobody knew me, and for once, nobody expected me to clean the table after. In Nebraska, I stopped at a rest area at sunset and took a picture of the sky turning gold over a flat stretch of land that seemed to go on forever. It wasn't part of Invisible Women. There were no faces in it, no hidden loneliness, no quiet labor. It was just open space. I remember looking at the photo on the back of my camera and thinking, I don't know who I am when nobody is using me. That scared me more than I expected. It also made me keep going. When I finally reached Carmel by the sea, the air smelled like salt and wet stone, and the Pacific was so wide it made me feel small in a way that didn't insult me. Aunt Ruth was standing outside the Ceramic Cup, her cafe and pottery studio, wearing a paint-smudged sweater and waving before I had even parked. I got out of the car and tried to say something normal, but nothing came. She just pulled me into a hug and held on. "You made it," she said. Not, "What did your mother say?" Not, "Are you sure?" Not, "This is a lot." Just, "You made it." My room above the cafe was small, with a white quilt, 1 desk, a crooked lamp, and a window that looked toward the ocean if you stood at the right angle. Ruth had put fresh towels on the bed and a little vase of lavender on the desk. I sat down on the edge of that bed and started crying so hard I couldn't hide it. Ruth didn't make a big speech. She just sat beside me and said, "Tomorrow at 2, Marcus wants to meet you. Tonight, you sleep." The next morning, I worked the cafe counter like my hands belonged to somebody calmer than me. Aunt Ruth showed me how to grind beans, pull espresso, stack cups, wipe the pastry case, and smile at regulars who seemed to know immediately that I was new, but didn't make a big thing of it. A man in a fisherman's cap asked where I was from, and I almost said nowhere because that was what it felt like. Instead, I said Boston, and he told me I looked like I needed the ocean. By noon, I had $37 in tips folded into my apron pocket, coffee grounds under my nails, and a strange lightness in my chest. Nobody had called me lazy. Nobody had asked why I wasn't somewhere else. Nobody had treated my time like a public resource. At 2 p.m., I walked into Coastal Light Gallery with my portfolio on a flash drive and my stomach in knots. Marcus Coleman was not what I expected. I had pictured someone cold, expensive, and impossible to impress. The kind of man who would glance at my work and tell me to build a stronger brand before showing me the door. Instead, he had silver hair, rolled up sleeves, and a calm face that made the room feel less intimidating. He led me to a small office behind the main gallery, pulled up my photographs on a large monitor, and went quiet in a way that terrified me. The first image was an older woman at a bus stop, one hand gripping a worn purse, her face turned slightly toward traffic that still hadn't arrived. Marcus leaned closer to the screen and said, "This is the one Ruth sent me first. I kept coming back to it." I started explaining too much because nerves make me feel silence, but he lifted one hand gently and said, "You don't have to defend it. The photograph already knows what it's doing." That sentence did something to me. I know that sounds small, but after years of being treated like anything I did had to be justified, hearing someone say my work could stand on its own nearly knocked the air out of me. Marcus went through image after image, asking real questions. Where had I taken this one? How long did I wait before shooting? Did I always work in natural light? Why did so many subjects look like they were holding something back? I answered as honestly as I could, and slowly I stopped feeling like a fraud who had wandered into the wrong building. Then he turned away from the screen, looked at me, and said he wanted to offer me a solo exhibition in 6 weeks. 15 pieces, printed and framed by the gallery, opening night promoted to local collectors, with 60% of sales going to me. I asked him to repeat it because I thought I had misunderstood. He smiled and said, "Wendy, I'm not doing you a favor. I'm asking to represent work I believe can sell." I signed the contract 2 days later. My name was printed at the top as Artist, Wendy Dixon, and I stared at that line longer than I should have. Artist. Not helper, not aunt, not other daughter, not flexible Wendy who could be moved around whenever someone else needed space. Marcus noticed me looking at it and didn't rush me. His assistant notarized the papers, gave me a copy, and when I stepped back outside into the California sun, I held that folder against my chest like somebody might try to take it. Maybe that sounds dramatic, but I had spent years doing work that vanished the second it was finished. Clean kitchen, quiet children, filed tax returns, perfect party. No evidence except everyone else's comfort. This was different. This had my name on it. This said I had made something that existed even when I wasn't standing there begging anyone to notice. Back in Boston, my family was learning what my absence actually meant. I didn't answer most of the calls, but the texts told enough of the story. On the second day of their Hawaii trip, Megan wanted to know where Sophie's eardrops were packed. On the third, she asked what Oliver usually ate when he refused restaurant food. My mother texted that the resort staff was not nearly as attentive as expected, which was probably the first time she realized I had been doing more than carrying trays. Derek sent one stiff message asking for the pediatrician's number, as if I were a misplaced file. I deleted that one without answering. The old Wendy would have stopped everything to fix it, even from across the country. The new Wendy sat in a print lab with Marcus, comparing paper finishes for the bus stop photograph, while my phone buzzed in my bag like a trapped insect. 6 weeks later, I stood in the middle of Coastal Light Gallery with 15 of my photographs on the walls and could barely make myself breathe normally. The gallery looked beautiful in a way I didn't know my life was allowed to look. Soft lights, clean white walls, black frames, a bartender pouring champagne, and people moving slowly from picture to picture like the faces I had captured mattered. Aunt Ruth stood near the entrance, talking to customers, like she was trying not to cry. Marcus introduced me to Collectors, a magazine writer, and a woman named Mrs. Evelyn Peyton, who wore pearls and had the kind of posture that made people step aside without being asked. Mrs. Peyton stopped in front of the bus stop photograph for a long time, then told Marcus she wanted it. When I saw the small red dot placed beside the title card, I thought there had been a mistake. Marcus leaned close and said, "She bought it for $3,000. I had to excuse myself to the back hallway for a minute because my knees actually went weak. I was still trying to recover from that when the gallery door opened and Megan walked in with Derek right behind her. They looked sunburned, expensive, and completely out of place. Megan scanned the room first with confusion, then with something close to alarm, as if the size of the room and the people in it were contradicting a story she had already told herself about me. She rushed toward me with her arms open and said, "Oh my God, Wendy, We've been so worried. 50 people turned. I didn't hug her. I said, "This is my opening night." She looked around then, really looked, at the framed photographs, the champagne, the red dots, Marcus standing nearby, Aunt Ruth watching from across the room. For 1 second, I thought she might actually congratulate me. Instead, she leaned in and whispered, "I'm pregnant again, and I need you to come home." For a second, I honestly thought I had heard her wrong, not because Megan asking for help was unusual, but because she had chosen that exact moment. I was standing under my own name in a room full of people who had come to see my work, with a red dot already beside a photograph someone had bought for $3,000. And my sister's first real sentence to me was about what she needed. Not, "I'm proud of you," not, "I'm sorry," not even, "How are you?" Just that she was pregnant again and I needed to come home. I kept my voice low because I did not want to turn my opening into a family argument. "Congratulations," I said. "I mean that, but I'm not coming back to Boston to be your childcare." Megan's face tightened, like I had said something cruel instead of something clear. Derek stepped closer and said, "Wendy, this isn't really the place." I almost laughed at that, because for once, he was right. It wasn't the place for them. It was the first room I had ever been in where my life was not organized around their convenience, and they had walked into it still expecting me to move aside. Aunt Ruth appeared beside me before I had to answer. She didn't raise her voice, but it carried. "She lives here now," she said. "She has work here." Derek looked at her like she was a waiter interrupting a private conversation. "With respect, Ruth, this is family business." Ruth's expression changed so fast I knew he had made a mistake. "Family business?" she said. "You mean the family business of leaving Wendy out of the Hawaii trip and calling her free help in emails you thought she'd never see?" Megan went pale. Derek's jaw shifted. Around us, conversations thinned out one by one until the gallery had that awful quiet that happens when everyone is pretending not to listen and absolutely listening. Mrs. Evelyn Peyton, the collector who had just bought my photograph, turned from the wall with her champagne glass still in her hand. She looked at Megan, then Derek, then back at me. "Free help?" she asked, not loudly, but the words moved through the room anyway. Megan whispered, "That's not what it sounds like." I looked at her and said, "It's exactly what it sounds like." My hands were cold, but my voice stayed steadier than I felt. I pulled out my phone, opened the screenshots, and read my mother's email out loud. "Keep Wendy here with the children. She has nothing important going on anyway. It's like having free help." Then I read Megan's reply. "She'll probably feel needed for once. It's kind of sad, but at least it works out for us." Nobody spoke after that. I had imagined that moment 100 different ways during the drive west, but I had never imagined the silence would be that complete. Megan started crying, but not the soft kind she used with my mother. This was uglier, more embarrassed, because people were looking at her and she couldn't control what they knew. Derek tried to recover first. He said, "This is being taken out of context. Families ask each other for help." Mrs. Peyton set her glass down on a nearby table and said, "I ask my assistant for help, then I pay her." That landed harder than anything I could have said, because Derek had no polite answer for it. Then the door opened again, and my parents walked in. My mother was wearing her good Burberry trench coat, which told me she had come prepared to manage a crisis in public. My father followed behind her, looking smaller than I remembered. Patricia crossed the gallery without looking at the photographs. She came straight toward me and said, "Wendy, we need to talk outside." Not hello, not congratulations, just another instruction. I said, "No, we can talk here." Her eyes flicked around the room then, and I watched her realize she was not in her living room. These were not church friends she could charm or neighbors she could impress. These were people who had already heard enough. My mother tried anyway. She said I had abandoned the family, that Megan was pregnant, that I had taken a misunderstanding and turned it into a public embarrassment. My father murmured my name once, like he wanted me to calm down, but I wasn't the one making it worse. I held up my phone again and said, "You told Megan I had nothing important to do. You called me free help. At your anniversary dinner, you announced a family vacation in front of 30 people and then told me I wasn't family enough to go, only useful enough to babysit." My mother's face went red. "That is not fair," she snapped. And that was the first time I felt almost peaceful, because I realized fairness had only started mattering to her when she was the one being judged. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I didn't say half the things I'd practiced in motel rooms between Boston and California. I just said, "I'm done. I'm not your backup plan. I'm not Megan's emergency childcare. And I'm not coming home to keep everyone comfortable." Megan was crying openly by then. Derek had gone quiet, which was probably the smartest thing he did all night. My father looked at the photographs for the first time, really looked, and something crossed his face that I still don't fully understand. My mother said, "You'll regret humiliating us like this." I said, "No, Mom. You're embarrassed because people heard what you said. That's not the same thing." They left a few minutes later, but the damage stayed behind in the room like smoke. Aunt Ruth put an arm around me, and Marcus handed me a glass of water because apparently I looked like I might fold in half. I kept apologizing to him for ruining the opening, and he finally stopped me and said, "Wendy, you sold 3 more pieces while this was happening." I thought he was trying to make me feel better, but he showed me the sales sheet. By the end of the night, 8 of the 15 photographs had sold for $14,000 total. My share was $8,400. I stared at that number until it blurred, because it was more money than I had made in months of careful, invisible work for clients and family and people who always assumed I had nowhere better to be. The fallout came in pieces. Megan had her baby a few months later, a little girl named Charlotte, and I sent a gift card and a short note. I did not fly back. I did not offer to help. My mother left one voicemail asking if I had gotten this independence thing out of my system yet, and I deleted it before the end. My father surprised me. He sent one email after a magazine article came out about my exhibition. It was only 3 sentences, but one of them said, "I saw your work, and I'm proud of you." I kept that email. I didn't answer right away because I didn't know what to do with it, but I kept it. My life now is not glamorous every day. I still work morning shifts at Ruth's Cafe when she needs me, and I still do accounting for a few clients because bills do not care about emotional breakthroughs. But I have a small studio 3 blocks from the beach, a second exhibition scheduled with Marcus, and a newer camera I bought with money from my own work. The old Canon still sits on my shelf, wrapped in that cashmere scarf, because it was the first thing I ever bought just for myself. Sometimes I think about the night of the anniversary dinner and that dirty dessert plate in my hand. I remember how heavy it felt. Then I look at the framed contract on my wall with my name on it, and I remember that I put the plate down. I don't think every family story ends with people understanding what they did. Mine didn't. Not completely. Megan and I text on birthdays now. My mother sends stiff Christmas cards, and my father emails once in a while about articles he thinks I might like. It's not warm, but it's honest enough for now. I don't go back to Boston as the unpaid helper anymore, and I don't confuse being needed with being loved. That took me too long to learn, but I learned it. If this story hit something personal for you, please like the video, share it with someone who has been treated like the reliable one for too long, and subscribe for more stories like this. I know these situations are messy, and walking away is not always simple, but sometimes hearing someone else say no makes your own no feel a little less impossible. Thank you for listening all the way to the end and for giving this story your time. Have you ever been treated like the useful one instead of the loved one? Would you have read the emails out loud at the gallery, or would you have handled it privately? And if your family only values you when you are serving them, what do you think a real boundary should look like?